Ever felt like you're navigating through a storm without a compass? In a world that often seems chaotic and unpredictable, it's easy to get lost in the noise of daily life and immediate crises. We face decisions big and small, career moves, personal goals, unexpected setbacks, and sometimes we simply react, hoping for the best. But imagine if you had a way to step back, see the bigger picture, and chart a thoughtful course forward. That's what strategic thinking offers. Strategic thinking isn't just a buzzword for corporate boardrooms. It's a way of approaching life so that you're not merely drifting with the currents, but actively steering toward a destination of your own design. I remember sitting at my desk one evening, overwhelmed by a complex project at work and personal responsibilities piling up at home. My instinct was to dive in and start tackling tasks at random, just to feel productive. But a thought stopped me. Was I addressing what really mattered, or was I just being busy for the sake of it? That moment of pause was the beginning of a personal journey into a new way of thinking. Inspired by the ideas from a framework known as the 6 disciplines of strategic thinking, I began to realize that true progress, in work, in personal growth, in any endeavor, comes not just from working harder, but from thinking smarter about where and how to apply our efforts. Strategic thinking, as I came to understand it, is like having an inner toolkit for making sense of complexity and uncertainty. It consists of several key practices that anyone can develop, and these practices can transform how we make decisions and pursue our goals. Instead of reacting impulsively or getting bogged down in confusion, a strategic thinker steps back to discern patterns, considers how different pieces of a situation fit together, stays flexible in the face of change, systematically works through problems, envisions a better future, and navigates the human dynamics that come with any change. In essence, it's about being intentional about the future, your future, and not leaving it to chance. This essay explores those practices in a natural, reflective way, almost as if we're two friends talking about how to apply these ideas in real life. It draws inspiration from a comprehensive framework of strategic thinking, but it isn't about dry theory or corporate buzzwords. It's about real moments and choices we all face, and how adopting a strategic mindset can make those moments more manageable and meaningful. Along the way, we'll look at relatable examples from everyday life and from extraordinary achievements that illustrate how these disciplines play out. Some of these ideas might resonate deeply and even feel transformative. Others might simply affirm what you're already doing right. Through it all, consider how each concept relates to your own life. Think of times when you felt stuck or when you faced a challenge that seemed insurmountable. By reflecting on the principles we discuss, you may find new perspectives on those past situations. And perhaps more importantly, you'll be better prepared for the next time life throws you a curveball. Strategic thinking is not an abstract skill reserved for CEOs and generals. It's a practical approach that can empower you in your career, relationships, and personal growth. So let's embark on this exploration together. We'll unpack the 6 core disciplines of strategic thinking one by one, blending the wisdom from that framework with personal reflections and lessons that you can carry into your own journey. It starts with a simple but powerful idea. Before you can solve any problem or seize any opportunity, you have to see it clearly. In other words, you need to recognize the patterns in the chaos. We begin with pattern recognition, the art of finding meaning in the chaos. In any complex situation, there are often hidden threads of similarity, repeated behaviors, familiar sequences of events, clues that hint at a larger picture. A skilled strategic thinker learns to spot these threads. It's a bit like being a detective in your own life or work, piecing together fragments of evidence to see the bigger story. Think about an experienced doctor in an emergency room. Amid dozens of symptoms and tests, she quickly zeroes in on a telltale combination that reveals the underlying illness. Or consider an expert chess player. When they glance at the board, they don't just see a random assortment of pieces. They recognize patterns they've seen before. A cluster of pieces signaling a classic attack, a configuration that leaves a king vulnerable. These patterns guide their next moves. In everyday life, the board we face is often more complicated than chess or medicine, but the principle is the same. Hidden within the bustle of emails, meetings, errands, and news headlines, there are patterns. The key is learning to see them. I started to appreciate the power of pattern recognition during that hectic project I mentioned earlier. When I stopped to breathe and really look at what was happening, I noticed something crucial. Many of the urgent issues that were overwhelming me had a common root cause. There was a recurring breakdown in communication between two departments that was creating most of the chaos. This problem had surfaced before in smaller ways, but I'd brushed those instances aside as isolated annoyances. Now, in the middle of a major project, those small recurring issues had snowballed. By recognizing that pattern, poor communication repeatedly causing delays and confusion, I finally knew where to focus my energy. Instead of frantically putting out every little fire, I convened a meeting specifically between those two departments to clear the air and establish a better process for information sharing. It was a simple insight, really. Identify the pattern, address the root. But it felt like a revelation at the time, and it taught me a lesson I never forgot. Recognizing patterns doesn't just help in fixing problems, it can also help you seize opportunities. A friend of mine who runs a small retail business once shared how he navigated a major shift in the market. Early in one year, he noticed a subtle pattern in customer behavior. More people were asking about online shopping options and curbside pickup. At first, it was just a trickle of inquiries, easy to dismiss. But he paid attention and realized this wasn't random. It was the beginning of a trend. He recalls the exact moment it clicked for him. I realized at least a dozen customers in a week had asked about contactless service. That couldn't be a coincidence. Recognizing this emerging pattern, he quickly invested in his website and online customer service capabilities. A few months later, when external events suddenly made online shopping essential for everyone, his business was ready. He often told me that if he hadn't spotted that pattern early, if he had treated each customer question as an isolated, unrelated event, he would have been caught unprepared like many of his competitors. Instead, pattern recognition became his early warning system and his springboard to adapt. So how can you get better at seeing patterns amid the noise of daily life? Part of it comes from experience. Over time, as you encounter more scenarios, your mind starts comparing new situations with what you've seen before. But you don't have to rely on passive experience alone. You can actively train yourself to observe and learn. One approach is to consciously look for trends and commonalities. Let's say you're trying to improve your performance at work. You might keep a journal for a few weeks of what tasks go smoothly and what things derail you. You might discover, for instance, that every time you have a certain type of meeting in the late afternoon, your next day feels behind schedule. Perhaps a pattern indicating those meetings tend to run long or drain your energy. With that insight, you could experiment with scheduling changes or prepare differently for those meetings. Another approach is to learn from others who have a knack for pattern recognition. If you know someone who seems especially insightful, maybe a mentor or a colleague who connects the dots quickly, observe how they process information and ask them to share their thinking. Often, experts have mental frameworks for separating signal from noise. They know what clues to look for and what to ignore. By learning those clues, you can sharpen your own pattern sensing abilities. Importantly, pattern recognition isn't just a professional skill, it's deeply personal too. We all have patterns in our own behavior and in our lives. Maybe you notice that every time you try to adopt a new habit, you do well for a week and then fall off when something stressful happens. That's a pattern. If you recognize it, you can start planning for it, perhaps by finding ways to manage stress or by having a friend check in and keep you accountable around that 1 week mark. Or consider relationships. Have you ever realized that many of your past disagreements with a loved one tend to follow a similar script? Noticing that pattern can be the first step to breaking it, maybe by changing how you respond at the key moment that usually triggers the argument. In this way, pattern recognition isn't about cold analysis. It's about understanding the narratives that keep playing out in your life so that you can change the plot in a direction that serves you better. In essence, pattern recognition gives you a clearer view of the landscape. It's like climbing a small hill to survey the terrain before you trek through a dense forest. From that vantage point, you might see the repeating rows of trees or a path that isn't obvious from the ground level. Once you see the pattern, you can navigate smarter. Without that perspective, you're more likely to stumble blindly or go in circles. Whether you're leading a team, managing your household, or just trying to make sense of world events, the ability to pick up on patterns will save you time, energy, and often a good deal of frustration. It turns the cacophony of life into a melody that you can follow and sometimes even influence. Having said that, recognizing patterns is just the start. It tells you what's happening and hints at why, but it doesn't automatically tell you what to do about it. For that, you need to understand how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. Once you've seen the patterns in play, the next step in strategic thinking is to dive deeper into how things connect, influence each other, and form a system. This is where we move from simply observing what's happening to understanding the mechanics behind it. In other words, once you've climbed that hill and spotted the patterns in the forest, it's time to map out the ecosystem of the forest itself. That's the essence of systems analysis. Once you've started spotting patterns, the next step is understanding the system beneath those patterns. Patterns tell us what tends to happen. Systems analysis helps us grasp why it happens and how one thing affects another. If pattern recognition is seeing the puzzle pieces, systems thinking is figuring out how those pieces fit together to make a coherent picture. It's about mapping relationships and interactions, cause and effect, feedback loops, the whole chain of events that link elements of a situation. In practical terms, this means when you face a complex scenario, you don't just list the parts of the problem, you also ask, how do these parts influence each other? If I change one thing, what else might change as a result? I learned the value of this kind of holistic thinking through a tough lesson. Early in my career, I was part of a team at a company that decided to implement a new software tool to improve productivity. On the surface, it was a simple fix to a specific problem. Our sales team was struggling to track customer leads, so a new customer relationship management (CRM) system seemed like the perfect answer. We rolled it out quickly, expecting immediate improvements in sales follow-ups. But we failed to think about the broader system of how our company operated. We didn't consider how this new tool would interact with other parts of the business. As it turned out, the software changed the way information flowed between sales and marketing, and our marketing team wasn't fully trained on the new process. Leads started falling through the cracks, and tension grew between the departments. Not only that, but the extra time salespeople were spending learning the new tool meant they spent less time on actual calls for a while, which hurt revenue in the short term. In hindsight, the new CRM system itself wasn't a bad idea, but we had looked at it in isolation, like a piece we tried to snap into the puzzle without seeing the whole picture. A colleague later summed it up perfectly. We solved one problem and unintentionally created two new ones, because we didn't think about how everything connects. That experience cemented in my mind why systems analysis matters. You have to think of the context, the web of connections, not just the shiny solution in front of you. Systems thinking often means asking the right questions before taking action. If you're making a change at work, consider, who does this affect downstream? What other processes rely on the thing I'm about to alter? Is there a knock-on effect, like dominoes falling, if I change this one element? Sometimes it helps to draw it out. I've found that sketching a simple diagram or map of the situation can clarify a lot. For instance, when I was considering going back to school for an advanced degree while working full-time, I literally drew a map of my life on a sheet of paper. I wrote down work, school, family, health, hobbies, and drew arrows between them. Work took time away from family. School would take time from both work and family. Less time with family could affect my relationships and emotional support. Reduced time for hobbies and rest might impact my health. Seeing it laid out, I realized that taking on classes would significantly strain several parts of my life system unless I made adjustments. So I analyzed the connections and came up with a plan. I decided I could temporarily reduce overtime at work, lessening the impact on family time, plan a dedicated family night each week to maintain that connection, and wake up earlier to study so that my study time didn't entirely cannibalize other activities. I also saved up some money beforehand, financial planning being another part of the system, so I could afford to cut back on work hours for one semester. This little personal systems map helped me anticipate friction points and plan ways to manage them. As a result, when I did start the academic program, the transition was far smoother than it would have been if I hadn't thought through all those ripple effects. What's powerful about systems analysis is that it makes complexity more manageable. At first, examining how everything connects might sound overwhelming. After all, a big system could have dozens of moving parts. But paradoxically, thinking systemically can prevent you from drowning in details or being blindsided by unintended consequences. Instead of reacting to each problem in isolation, you proactively simplify the complexity by focusing on the most important elements and their relationships. In a way, it's like building a mental model or running a simulation in your head. You identify the key pieces, for example, in a business context, the team, the technology, the customers, the workflow, and the key linkages between them. You don't have to capture every tiny detail, just the structure that really matters. Then you can play out what-if scenarios in that model. If you push here, what bulges there? If one link weakens, what breaks? This kind of thinking is invaluable not only in big projects but also in everyday decisions. Consider a more everyday example, managing household finances. Treat your personal budget as a system. Your income, expenses, savings, and investments are all interconnected. If your income changes, say you get a raise, or on the flip side, you lose some overtime hours, how does that affect your expenses or savings goals? If you decide to spend more on dining out each week, what other part of your budget will have to shrink? A strategically thinking person might map out those connections. If I allocate more money to a new car, which increases my monthly expenses, I'll have to cut back on entertainment or delay that home renovation. By seeing the financial system as a whole, you can avoid the trap of thinking a decision lives in a vacuum. How many people have made a big purchase thinking they could afford it, only to find it threw their whole financial picture off balance? That usually happens when we isolate a decision from the broader system of our finances. Another area where systems thinking proves transformative is in relationships and team dynamics. A team at work, for example, is a system of people. If you change one element of that system, say you bring in a new team member or change the team leader, everything shifts a little. The communication patterns, the unspoken norms, the distribution of responsibilities might all be affected. I've seen cases where a high-performing team started struggling after a seemingly minor change in routine, because we failed to recognize that the routine was part of a finely balanced system of collaboration. Only when we stepped back and looked at how information flowed and how decisions were made, the system of teamwork, did we identify what was thrown off balance and find a way to correct it. Systems thinking also trains you to look for feedback loops, situations where an output of the system feeds back into it as an input. These loops can either stabilize things or send them spiraling out of control. For example, think about stress and productivity in your personal life. If you start sleeping less to get more work done, a change in one part of the system, reducing rest to increase work hours, initially you might make a little progress. But less sleep might reduce your overall productivity and increase your errors, which then creates more work to fix and more stress. That stress can further disrupt your sleep. Now you have a negative feedback loop. Lack of sleep leads to lower productivity, which leads to more stress and even less sleep. If you recognize that loop early through a systems lens, you can intervene, maybe by prioritizing sleep as a non-negotiable part of the system, or by finding ways to work smarter rather than just longer. On the positive side, feedback loops can also be virtuous cycles. Imagine you start dedicating an hour each weekend to a new hobby that relaxes you. As you become more relaxed and fulfilled outside of work, you bring more energy and patience into your family life and your job. That improvement might lead to praise or positive feedback at work, which boosts your mood and reinforces your dedication to that relaxing hobby or self-care routine. The output, improved mood and performance, feeds back as input, motivation to continue a positive habit, creating a reinforcing loop. Recognizing these dynamics is part of strategic thinking too. When you see a positive loop, you can nurture it, and when you spot a negative one, you can work to break it. Developing a knack for systems analysis takes practice. One way to start is by deliberately mapping out a problem you're facing. Write down all the stakeholders or components of the situation, people, processes, resources, whatever they may be, and draw lines or arrows to show how they interact or depend on each other. Ask yourself what the purpose or goal of the whole system is, if there is one. Are all the parts aligned toward that goal, or are some working at cross purposes? You might be surprised at the insights that emerge from this exercise. For example, a friend of mine was frustrated that her small business wasn't growing despite a great product. When she mapped out her business system, she realized that the incentive structure for her sales team was flawed. Their commission plan encouraged them to focus on quick, easy sales, short-term gains, rather than building long-term client relationships, which the business needed for sustainable growth. That incentive structure was a hidden part of the system driving behavior that ran counter to her overall goal. By spotting it, she was able to redesign the incentives, a change in one part of the system, and saw a dramatic improvement in how her team engaged with clients over time. In life and in work, systems analysis often marks the difference between a fix that actually fixes something and a fix that just shifts the problem elsewhere. It encourages patience and thoughtful planning. Instead of jumping at the first solution that comes to mind, a strategic thinker steps back and surveys the whole field. If I solve it this way, what else might happen? Is there a better spot in the system to intervene? This discipline helps prevent those unintended consequences we all dread. It's not about predicting the future with perfect accuracy, no one can, but about being thoughtful enough to consider the context and the ripple effects of actions. It's a kind of wisdom that says every action is part of a larger story. With the ability to recognize patterns and understand systems, you have a strong foundation. You know what's happening and have a sense of why and how things are connected. But life wouldn't be life if things stayed still. Systems evolve, conditions change, and new information comes to light. This is why the next skill in strategic thinking is so important: mental agility. It's about staying flexible and sharp, ready to reframe your thinking as conditions shift and viewing situations from multiple angles. In short, even if you understand the system today, you have to be prepared for that system to change tomorrow, and you need the agility to change with it. No matter how clearly you see patterns or how well you understand a system, the world has a way of surprising you. Conditions change, new information emerges, and sometimes your initial assumptions turn out to be incomplete or mistaken. This is where mental agility comes in, the ability to think on your feet and shift your perspective as needed. Mental agility is like the flexibility of a great athlete, but in your mind. It means you can pivot quickly when circumstances demand it, and you can look at a challenge from different angles without losing your balance. In strategic thinking, this agility has two main facets. One is the capacity to move fluidly between big-picture thinking and detail-focused thinking, and the other is the knack for anticipating the moves and reactions of others in the game of life. Let's first talk about moving between levels of perspective. You might have heard the expression, "can't see the forest for the trees," referring to someone who is so bogged down in details that they lose sight of the big picture. There's also the opposite problem, focusing only on grand ideas, the forest, and missing the critical details, the trees, that actually make those ideas work. A strategic thinker avoids both pitfalls by practicing what we can call level shifting, zooming out to see the broad landscape, then zooming in to examine the nuts and bolts, and being able to do this dance deliberately. I once worked with a project manager who had an extraordinary talent for this. In project meetings, she would start by reminding everyone of our ultimate goal and how each piece of the project contributed to it, big picture. Then, if we ran into a technical snag, she would dive into the details with the engineers, asking pointed questions about code and data as if that was her sole focus, detail level. After resolving the nitty-gritty issue, she'd rise back up to the strategic view, making sure that the solution fit into our overall timeline and vision. Watching her, it felt like seeing someone shuttle between the 30,000-foot view and ground-level operations in the span of a single conversation. Her mental agility kept the team aligned with the big goals while still getting the details right. It also had a wonderful side effect. It taught the rest of us not to get stuck in one mode of thinking. If someone got too lost in a detail, she'd gently remind them how it connects to the bigger goal. If someone was hand-waving with lofty ideas, she'd nudge them to consider practical specifics. That kind of cognitive flexibility can be cultivated. For example, if you're naturally a big-picture thinker who loves concepts and vision, you might challenge yourself to occasionally roll up your sleeves and dig into a specific task, or learn more about the technical aspects of whatever you're involved in. Conversely, if you're detail-oriented by nature, say you're an engineer or an accountant who finds comfort in specifics, practice stepping back now and then to ask, what is all this for? What's the end goal here? And is what I'm doing truly serving that goal? By intentionally shifting levels like this, you train your mind to be comfortable at both altitudes. Over time, you'll find you can transition more smoothly, and you'll recognize when a situation calls for one approach or the other. Now, the second facet of mental agility, thinking ahead and anticipating moves, almost like a chess player planning several moves in advance. Life may not be a board game, but there are certainly moments when it helps to think a few steps ahead. Imagine you're preparing to propose a new initiative at your job. A mentally agile approach wouldn't just formulate a plan in isolation. It would also consider how others might react to it. What objections might your boss raise? How might a colleague whose resources you need respond? If you can anticipate those, you can adjust your strategy before you even present your idea. Perhaps you realize that a colleague might fear your project will encroach on their territory. Anticipating that, you can approach them beforehand, frame the idea in a way that shows how it benefits them too, or be ready with answers to their concerns. Similarly, in your personal life, let's say you're planning a difficult conversation with a family member about setting boundaries or making a big life decision. Thinking ahead about how they might feel or respond can help you approach the conversation more sensitively and effectively. This isn't about trying to script everything or manipulate people. It's about being prepared and having considered the game a bit further out than the immediate next move. A classic real-world example of agility and anticipation is how some companies respond to competitive moves. Consider a smartphone company that is about to release a new model. They're not just thinking about their own launch. They're thinking, if we introduce feature X, how will our competitor respond? Will they cut their prices, launch a new ad campaign to undercut us? And if they do, what will we do next? This kind of scenario planning can make the difference between being caught off guard and being ready to adapt. On a more individual level, think of a chess enthusiast playing a match. She's not only considering her current move, but also visualizing the board a few moves ahead, both for herself and her opponent. Strategic thinkers apply a similar mindset to everyday situations. They mentally walk through possible futures. What if plan A doesn't pan out? What's plan B or C? If the situation takes an unexpected turn, what will I do next? The goal isn't to be a fortune teller. It's to avoid being flat-footed when change happens. One thing I've learned about mental agility is that it thrives on openness and a bit of humility. You have to be willing to admit that your current approach might not be the best if new evidence emerges. It's a kind of intellectual flexibility that values learning over ego. I recall a time I was convinced that a particular strategy was perfect for a project. I had a detailed plan laid out and was very proud of it. Then, partway through, some new data came in that challenged one of my key assumptions. At first, I felt defensive. After all, I'd invested a lot of time in my plan, but a strategic mindset nudged me to swallow my pride and reconsider. Mental agility meant stepping outside my attachment to the plan and looking at the situation with fresh eyes. Okay, given this new information, what makes sense now? I ended up altering our course significantly. It wasn't easy to do emotionally, but in retrospect, it absolutely saved the project. This taught me that being mentally agile sometimes means unlearning or letting go as much as learning new things. It's the discipline of being ready to change your mind. We can actually practice mental agility in fun ways. Engaging in activities that force your brain to switch gears can build that muscle. Some people play chess or fast-paced strategy games to hone the ability to think ahead. Others do brainstorming exercises where they deliberately consider wild what-if scenarios. For instance, what if our main product suddenly became obsolete overnight? What would we do? Even puzzles and brain teasers can help, because they often require you to see patterns at one moment and then shift perspective the next. One simple exercise I enjoy is something I call flip the vantage point. When you're mulling over a problem, intentionally adopt the perspective of a different stakeholder or an outside observer. Ask yourself, how would I view this situation if I were the customer? Or if I were my boss? What if I were my competitor? What would I do next? What would my best friend advise if they were in my shoes? This kind of mental role-playing pushes you out of your default viewpoint and can reveal insights you hadn't considered. Another aspect of agility is handling ambiguity. Often we face situations where we don't have all the information or there's no clear right answer. The mentally agile person can still move forward, making the best decision with what they have and being ready to pivot if needed. It's like walking through a fog. You might not see the whole path, but you take a few steps, see a little further with each step, and adjust as the path reveals itself. Someone who lacks agility might freeze up in the fog, waiting for it to clear entirely, which might never happen, or charge blindly ahead and crash into unseen obstacles. The agile thinker moves with caution but doesn't stand still, taking action, learning from each step, and willing to change direction as the picture becomes clearer. Mental agility brings a certain resilience too. If you're flexible in your thinking, setbacks don't crush you as much. Instead of seeing a failed plan as a disaster, you're more likely to see it as a learning experience or an expected part of the journey. Time to switch to the next plan. You become like a tree that bends in the wind rather than a rigid tree that might crack. I've noticed this in leaders I admire. When confronted with sudden changes or crises, they almost seem to relish the challenge. They get this spark in their eyes and roll up their sleeves, ready to rethink and reconfigure. It's not that they enjoy crises, but they have confidence in their ability to adapt. That confidence is contagious and reassuring to everyone around them. And it's a reminder that agility isn't just a personal asset. In a team setting, one person's agility can inspire a whole group to stay calm and flexible under pressure. By cultivating mental agility, you prepare yourself for a world that will never stop changing. You learn not to get too comfortable with any one plan or perspective, which in turn keeps you energized and curious. It's a mindset that says, there's always another angle, another way, if this one doesn't work out. When combined with the pattern recognition and systems understanding we discussed earlier, agility ensures that you can not only see what's happening and understand it, but also respond to it in the smartest way possible at any given moment. At this point, we've talked about perceiving what's going on, patterns, understanding why and how, systems, and staying flexible as things evolve, mental agility. These give us a rich understanding of situations and a nimble mind. But strategic thinking isn't just about analysis or understanding. It's ultimately about action, making decisions and solving problems to move forward. This is why another key discipline in the strategic thinking toolkit is structured problem solving. It's about taking that clear view of the playing field and methodically working through challenges to come up with effective solutions, rather than just winging it or hoping problems solve themselves. When faced with a tough challenge, it's tempting to dive right in and start fixing things impulsively. We often just want the problem to go away as soon as possible. But strategic thinking teaches us to take a breath and approach problem solving in a structured way. Structured problem solving is about having a method to the madness. a clear, step-by-step approach to understand the issue deeply and work out the best solution, rather than just treating symptoms or patching things up temporarily. It's like being an engineer confronted with a broken machine. Instead of randomly yanking on wires or replacing parts on a guess, you systematically diagnose what's wrong, consider various ways to repair it, and then implement the fix that addresses the root cause. I learned the importance of structure in problem solving during a project that had gone off the rails. Our team was responsible for improving customer satisfaction for a service we provided. We had plenty of customer feedback data, and one issue kept coming up. Customers were unhappy with the wait time for support. Instinctively, we all jumped to a solution. Let's hire more support staff to bring down the wait times. It seemed obvious, and we rushed to implement it. Months later, to our dismay, customer satisfaction barely budged. We were perplexed. We had thrown resources at the problem and expected a quick win, but it didn't materialize. So we went back to the drawing board and decided to apply a more structured approach this time. First, we clearly defined the problem we were trying to solve. Yes, on the surface it was long wait times, but we dug deeper. Why were the wait times long? And was wait time truly the main driver of dissatisfaction, or just a symptom of something else? We gathered more data and talked to customers directly. It turned out many customers were okay waiting a bit if they got a truly helpful answer when the representative finally responded. The real frustration was that often, even after waiting, they received incomplete or unhelpful answers, meaning they had to contact support multiple times for the same issue. In other words, the core problem wasn't just speed, it was quality of support. That was a pivotal insight. Our initial solution, hiring more staff, was like putting a bandage on the wrong wound. Once we reframed the problem as improving the quality and completeness of support answers, everything clicked. We then brainstormed solutions for that real problem: better training for support agents, a more comprehensive knowledge base so agents could find answers easily, and improving how we routed complex queries to specialists. We implemented those changes, and over the next quarter, customer satisfaction started climbing significantly. This experience hammered home a classic lesson: a well-defined problem is half solved. By structuring our problem-solving process, first asking, what problem are we really solving, and only then moving to solutions, we eventually succeeded. The structured approach to problem-solving often involves a few core phases. Different experts might label them differently, but they generally boil down to defining the problem, exploring possible solutions, deciding on the best course of action, and then making it happen, implementing the solution and following through. In a team context, I would add another phase at the very start, involving the right people and agreeing on the process. Let's break that down in a conversational way. Imagine you're leading a team that's tasked with cutting costs in your department because of a budget shortfall. A haphazard approach might have everyone randomly slashing a bit here and there without much coordination. Easy to do quickly, but likely to cause chaos or cut something important by mistake. A structured approach, on the other hand, would start with gathering the team and clearly defining the goal. We need to reduce our expenses by 15% while preserving our core functions. That's defining the problem and goal in one clear statement. Next, you'd clarify the process. Perhaps set up a small working group to analyze current spending and give yourselves a timeline to come up with options. By communicating the process, here's how we'll tackle this, you ensure everyone is on the same page and reduce anxiety. People know there's a plan rather than a panic. As you dive into solving the problem, framing and scoping it correctly is crucial. If the problem is too broadly defined, we must become efficient. The solutions will be all over the place and unfocused. If it's too narrow, cut 15% from travel expenses only. You might miss creative solutions elsewhere. So part of structuring the problem is finding the right balance and scope, like setting the boundaries of the playing field. In our budget example, you might decide to look at all discretionary spending but exclude mandatory costs like salaries if layoffs are off limits, making it clear what's in scope for cuts and what isn't. Clarity here prevents wasted effort later. Once the problem is well defined and the scope is clear, the structured thinker gathers information and explores solutions. This can be the creative part of the process, brainstorming ideas, researching how others have solved similar problems, and so on. The key difference in a structured approach is that you do this systematically. You might generate a list of 10 cost-cutting ideas, but you don't stop there. You then need to weigh them. What criteria will you use to evaluate these ideas? Maybe you decide your criteria are impact, how much will it save, feasibility, how easy or hard will it be to implement, and side effects, what else could this affect? With agreed-upon criteria, you and your team can assess each idea more objectively. You might find that some seemingly promising ideas don't actually save much money, or that some easy cuts would unfortunately compromise something vital. Through this analysis, perhaps you narrow it down to 2 or 3 viable options, say renegotiating vendor contracts and consolidating some software subscriptions. Then it comes time to decide on the best option or combination of options. In a team, structured problem-solving often means facilitating a discussion or using a decision-making method that everyone finds fair. Maybe it's a simple vote. Maybe as the leader, you take everyone's input and then make the final call, depending on the situation. But because you followed a transparent process, people are more likely to accept the outcome, even if it's not their personal favorite idea. They've seen the reasoning laid out, and they feel the process was fair. Finally, structure carries through into execution, committing to a course of action and assigning clear responsibilities. One thing I've seen derail solutions is when everyone agrees on what to do, but no one is specifically tasked with doing it, or people aren't aligned on how it will be done. A structured approach means you finish the problem-solving phase not just with, we will cut costs by renegotiating contracts, but with, Alice will gather all vendor contracts and identify which are up for renewal. Bob will analyze where we have leverage to negotiate. Carol will oversee contacting the vendors, and we aim to complete this by the end of next month. The difference is night and day. Instead of a wish, you have a concrete plan with owners and deadlines. It's much more likely to actually happen. Now, even the best structured plan can run into snags. This is where flexibility within structure comes in, a theme that by now sounds familiar. Strategic thinking doesn't mean rigidly following a plan off a cliff. As you implement your solution, you might discover new information or an unforeseen complication. Maybe in trying to renegotiate contracts, you find one vendor who won't budge and is essential to your operations. A structured thinker will bring that information back into the process. Perhaps we need to adjust our plan, find the remaining savings elsewhere, or approach the problem anew. There's no shame in iterating. In fact, built into good problem solving is a feedback step, checking whether the solution is actually solving the problem. If not, you loop back. It's not a failure to revisit your understanding of the problem or to refine your solution. It's simply part of solving complex issues. I often think of it like navigating with a map and compass. You plot a course, structure, but as you travel, you constantly check your bearings, feedback. If you notice you're a few degrees off, you correct your course before you get too far astray. Structured problem solving is also a social process, especially for big challenges. Involving the right people is vital. I hinted at this earlier, but it's worth emphasizing. Even if you personally have a great idea for how to fix a problem, rolling it out in isolation can backfire if others don't buy in. People support what they help create. I've seen leaders bring their teams together to define the problem collectively and contribute ideas, and the difference in morale and commitment is palpable. When team members feel heard and see their input shaping the solution, they take ownership. Then executing the solution becomes a shared mission rather than just an order from above. In my own life outside of work, I've applied this principle too. When my family faced a big decision, moving to a new city, for instance, we treated it like a shared problem to solve. We sat around the kitchen table and talked through what we were really trying to achieve. Better job opportunities, a good community, etc. Laid out our options, City A, City B, or staying put, and each family member weighed in with their concerns and hopes. We even drew up a simple pros and cons list together. By structuring it as a collective exercise, everyone felt involved. In the end, even though not everyone got their top choice, we all understood the reasoning and accepted the outcome because we had solved it together. This structured approach to tackling challenges might sound a bit methodical, and it is, but it can be deeply reassuring amid chaos. When you're faced with a mess, having a process is like having a roadmap through a forest. It doesn't guarantee the journey will be easy, but it means you're less likely to wander in circles or fall into a ravine. And remember, structure doesn't kill creativity. In fact, it can channel it. Knowing that there's a phase for brainstorming wild ideas and a phase for critical evaluation can actually encourage people to be more creative, because they know their out-of-the-box suggestions will eventually be sifted logically. It provides a safe container for both imagination and analysis to play their parts. By solving problems in a structured way, you ensure that you're working on the right problem and that once you solve it, the solution sticks. This discipline connects closely with the next one: visioning. While structured problem-solving often deals with issues that already exist, current obstacles we need to overcome, visioning is about proactively defining where we want to go in the future. It's one thing to solve today's problems. It's another to imagine and create a better tomorrow. Strategic thinking demands that we do both. So let's turn to the forward-looking discipline of visioning, where we shift from troubleshooting the present to dreaming of and planning for the future. Up to now, we've focused on understanding the present and solving immediate problems. But strategic thinking also has a forward-looking side. It's not just about reacting to what is, but about creating what could be. This is where visioning comes into play. Visioning is the practice of picturing a future that you find compelling and worthwhile, and then using that picture as a guide for your actions today. It's about defining a destination so that your strategic thinking isn't just wandering aimlessly, but moving towards something meaningful. In a way, having a vision is like having a lighthouse on the shore. Even when seas are rough and skies are dark, that light gives you a steady point to navigate by. A powerful vision has a few key qualities. First, it's vivid and concrete enough that you can almost see or feel it. It's not a vague wish like, "I want to be successful," or "we should grow the business." Instead, it paints a specific picture. In 5 years, I want to be running my own design firm that focuses on sustainable architecture with a small team that feels like family. Or for a team, our company will transform into a leader in solar energy solutions with products that power millions of homes and a workplace culture that attracts the best engineers. Notice how these statements have substance. You can visualize elements of them and imagine what it would look and feel like when realized. That concreteness is important because it makes the vision relatable and believable. Second, a vision should be ambitious and inspiring. It ought to be something that stretches you, that gets you excited, and maybe a little nervous in a good way. If your vision doesn't require you to grow or innovate, it might not be big enough to galvanize you. For example, if a nonprofit's vision is simply to help a few people in our city, that's noble, but might not ignite much passion or creativity. But if instead they envision a city where no one goes hungry at night and everyone has access to nutritious food, that's a bold goal that can rally volunteers, donors, and staff with a sense of purpose. On a personal level, consider the difference between saying, "I'd like to learn guitar someday," versus, "I will perform a song at my best friend's wedding next year as a guitarist." The latter is specific and bold. It gives you butterflies, and that's a good sign that it's motivating. However, the third quality of a strong vision is that it remains achievable, or at least plausible. This is the balancing act. Too much ambition can tip into fantasy and end up demotivating. If the vision feels completely out of touch with reality, people, including yourself, might secretly think, "Well, that's never going to happen," and then it loses power. The sweet spot is a vision that is challenging yet attainable with effort. It should lie just at the edge of your comfort zone, where it's a bit of a reach, but not pure science fiction. For instance, a small startup might set a vision to become a national leader in our industry within a decade. That's ambitious, but perhaps doable with the right strategy and a lot of hard work. If they instead said, "We will outgrow the biggest multinational in our industry within a year," that's likely too far-fetched and would only cause eye rolls or despair. In our personal lives, if someone who's just started jogging sets a vision to run a marathon in a year, that could be an inspiring, tough goal that's within reach with training. But if they said they'll win an Olympic gold medal next year, that crosses into unrealistic territory for a beginner. The unrealistic vision wouldn't motivate, it would just feel discouraging or delusional. One technique many leaders and achievers use is to work backwards from the vision. Once you have a picture of the future you want, ask, what would need to be true for that vision to happen? And then, what steps can I take now or in the near future that move me in that direction? If your vision is to start your own business, maybe that means today you need to start saving money for seed capital, drawing up a business plan, or acquiring certain skills. If your vision is to live in a house by the ocean, what decisions about career or finances might lead you there over the next several years? By thinking backward, you turn the vision from a beautiful picture into a practical roadmap. It's very much aligned with the famous advice, begin with the end in mind. You essentially say, that's where I want to go. Now, how do I get from here to there? This helps break down a lofty goal into smaller milestones and actions. It doesn't mean the path will be easy or direct, but it gives you a starting strategy. Having a vision can be transformative. I remember early in my career, I felt like I was just drifting from project to project. I worked hard, but I didn't have a personal vision of what it was all for. A mentor of mine noticed this and challenged me to articulate where I wanted to be in 5 or 10 years. At first, I responded with something generic like, I want to be successful in my field. She pressed me. What did that actually look like? After some reflection, I painted a clearer vision. I saw myself leading a team at a mission-driven organization, working on products that made people's lives better, and still having time for family and creative hobbies. When I clarified that picture, it was like a fog lifted. Decisions became easier because I had a criterion to judge them against. Does this option move me closer to my vision or not? When opportunities arose, I could ask, is this in line with the direction I want to go? If an opportunity didn't align, no matter how tempting in the short term, I found it easier to say no. Conversely, I started actively seeking experiences that fit the vision, like leadership roles or projects in areas I was passionate about, even if they were a stretch. Over the years, that vision, with some tweaks along the way, served as a compass. And indeed, it largely came to fruition. I eventually did lead a team doing work I care about, and I made sure to carve out time for family and writing, keeping those personal priorities in view. That didn't happen by accident. It started with daring to articulate a vision. In leadership contexts, a compelling vision can unite and inspire a group of people. Think of historical examples. President John F. Kennedy's famous vision in 1961 of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth before the decade was out. That vision was clear, literally describing an outcome. Ambitious, nothing like it had been done, yet achievable enough to mobilize a nation's resources and brightest minds. They didn't know exactly how at first, but it was within the realm of possibility if they pushed the limits of technology and teamwork. It ignited a wave of innovation and effort that achieved exactly that goal in 1969. Or consider a business example. Early in its history, Microsoft's vision was a computer on every desk and in every home, all running Microsoft software. At a time when personal computers were far from ubiquitous, that vision was bold. It gave the company a clear direction and employees a shared sense of purpose. As history shows, it wasn't far off the mark in terms of shaping reality. On a smaller scale, imagine you have a team at work and you set a vision for a project. By the end of the year, our app will become the go-to platform for local artists to showcase and sell their work, and it will be known for its user-friendly design and vibrant community. If you communicate that vision well, team members can picture the end result. The thriving marketplace for art, happy users finding pieces they love, perhaps even local press covering the success. That image can be much more motivating than just saying, let's try to increase our user base. And as a leader, once the vision is out there, part of your job is to keep it front and center. You celebrate progress in terms of how it moves toward the vision. We've onboarded 50 new artists this month. Imagine how that growing community is making our platform more vibrant, and make decisions by asking which option aligns best with the vision. Visioning isn't only for organizations or career goals. It can deeply enrich personal life too. Couples sometimes create a shared vision for their future, like imagining the kind of family they want to build or the lifestyle they aim for together. Having that shared picture can guide countless decisions, from where to live and how to budget, to how to spend time and what values to instill in children. Individuals use visioning for personal development as well. Some make vision boards with images representing their goals. Others write detailed, future self narratives describing a day in their ideal life. These exercises work because they make the future feel tangible and emotionally resonant. When you can almost taste the future you desire, you're more likely to put in the effort and make the choices needed to get there. Of course, a vision isn't a magic wand. Just declaring a vision doesn't make it happen. It has to be coupled with the disciplines we've already discussed and the final one we'll discuss next. But what visioning does is provide direction and motivation. It acts as a filter and a focal point. Without a vision, you might climb a ladder quickly, but realize it was leaning against the wrong wall, as the saying goes. With a vision, you ensure that even slow progress is at least in the right direction. One more thing about vision, it works best when it's authentic. The most compelling visions come from genuine values and passions. If you craft a vision just because it sounds glamorous or because you think it's what you should want, it likely won't sustain you. Make sure your vision reflects what truly matters to you or your group. When it does, its power multiplies. You wake up each day knowing why you're doing what you're doing, and in tough times, that why can keep you going. Having a vision for the future naturally raises the question of how to get there, which loops back into strategy and problem solving. But there's another practical reality to address. No vision can be realized alone. Whether your vision is personal or collective, you exist in a network of other people, colleagues, friends, family, stakeholders, even competitors. Achieving anything significant means you'll have to navigate human dynamics and often get others on board. This is where the final discipline of strategic thinking comes in: political savvy. In the context of strategic thinking, politics isn't about office gossip or playing dirty. It's about understanding and working with the human environment, power dynamics, interests, relationships, to turn your vision into reality. So let's explore how navigating these social currents effectively is as crucial as any plan or idea on paper. The phrase office politics often carries a negative connotation. It brings to mind images of scheming, backroom deals, favoritism, and manipulation. No wonder many people say, "I hate politics, I just want to do my job." However, whether we like it or not, politics in some form is a natural part of any group of people working together. Anytime you have individuals with different interests, levels of influence, and perspectives, you have politics. The strategic thinker's task is not to deny or avoid this reality, but to navigate it ethically and effectively. In the context of strategic thinking, being politically savvy means understanding the human landscape around you and figuring out how to build alliances and coalitions to get things done. It's about knowing who the stakeholders are, what they care about, who holds influence, and how you can engage with them in a genuine way to advance a worthy goal. One way to reframe political savvy is to think of it as interpersonal strategy. Just as we analyze systems or plan solutions, here we're effectively analyzing the social network and planning how to interact within it. For instance, imagine you have a bold new idea for improving a process at work. It could save time and money, and you're excited about it. A purely logical approach might be to simply present your idea at the next meeting and expect everyone to immediately see its merit. But the politically savvy approach would be more nuanced. You'd first think, who would be affected by this change? Who would need to approve it? Who might resist, and why? Perhaps implementing the idea would add work for the IT department, so it would be wise to talk to someone in IT beforehand to understand their concerns, and maybe even incorporate their suggestions so they feel ownership. Maybe one manager has a lot of clout in cross-department meetings. It could help to get her buy-in one-on-one before the big discussion, so that you have an ally when the idea is brought up. These steps might seem like extra work, but they can mean the difference between an idea that dies in debate and one that gains broad support. You're essentially building a coalition for your idea, making sure the key players are on board, or at least not caught by surprise. I learned a hard lesson early in my career that drove this point home. I once developed a new workflow that I was certain would greatly improve our team's efficiency. Eager and idealistic, I wrote up a proposal and emailed it to the whole team and our bosses without really talking to anyone first. I assumed the brilliance of the idea spoke for itself. What I didn't realize was that my proposal unintentionally stepped on some toes. One senior colleague felt that his area of responsibility was being encroached upon, and he was insulted that I hadn't asked for his input. A manager in another department was worried that the change would make her team look bad for not having suggested it themselves, so she quietly opposed it behind the scenes. I was caught off guard when my idea met resistance and lukewarm responses. In the end, the proposal was shelved and never implemented. In hindsight, the idea wasn't the problem. My approach was. I had ignored the human element, the politics. After licking my wounds, I sought advice from a mentor who gently pointed out my missteps. With his guidance, I tried again a few months later on a different improvement idea, but this time I approached key colleagues individually first. I listened to their perspectives and even let them influence the proposal. When I eventually brought the refined idea to the table, it wasn't it was our idea. Those colleagues I consulted became advocates during the discussion, saying things like, "We were talking about this and it seems like a good direction." The proposal passed easily. That experience taught me that being politically savvy doesn't mean being manipulative. It means being considerate of others' perspectives and interests, and being strategic about how you gain support for an initiative. Political savvy also involves understanding power dynamics and informal networks. Every organization, and even social group, has a formal hierarchy, who reports to whom, official roles, and so on. But just as important is the informal structure. Who actually influences opinions, who is respected by others, who has deep institutional knowledge, or who serves as the go-to person when something needs to get done. Sometimes the person with the big title isn't the one everyone listens to. It might be a long-tenured employee who's the unofficial guru, or an executive assistant who has the ear of the CEO. Being attuned to these dynamics helps you navigate effectively. For example, if you're new to a company and you have an idea, it can be invaluable to identify these influence hubs. Maybe you notice that whenever a certain engineer speaks up in meetings, the whole room gives full attention. That's a clue that she has earned respect. It might be wise to float your idea by her and get her feedback. If someone like that supports you, others are likely to as well. Likewise, keep an eye out for potential blockers, the people who often object or voice concerns. Rather than seeing them as adversaries, think of them as crucial feedback sources and even potential partners. If you bring them into the process early, sometimes they become your strongest supporters because you took their concerns seriously. Another aspect of being savvy in organizations is knowing how to influence in various ways. Direct authority, do this because I say so, is actually a rather limited tool and often not the most effective, unless you're in a crisis where quick compliance is critical. More often, influence is subtle. It can involve framing an idea in terms that appeal to your audience's values and priorities. If I'm proposing a new marketing strategy to a group that cares deeply about customer satisfaction, I'll emphasize how this strategy improves the customer experience. If I'm talking to the finance folks, I'll highlight the cost savings. This isn't deceit. It's connecting the dots between what I want to happen and what others care about. It's showing people how saying yes to my idea also helps them or aligns with something they want. Building relationships is at the heart of positive politics. People are much more inclined to support someone they trust and have a rapport with. That means taking the time, often when you don't immediately need anything, to get to know colleagues, to help them out when you can, and to establish goodwill. Then, when you do need buy-in for something, you're not coming in cold or only when you need a favor. You're coming as someone who has shown respect and collaboration in the past. Think about it. We do this naturally in life. If a neighbor you barely know asks you for a significant favor, you might hesitate. But if a neighbor you've chatted with regularly, who once helped you fix your fence, asks for the same favor, you're likely to oblige. It's the same in professional networks. Relationships matter. Now, a critical piece of advice. Being politically savvy must go hand in hand with integrity. The dark side of office politics is real. There are people who manipulate, take credit for others' work, spread rumors, or use alliances purely for personal gain at the expense of colleagues or the organization's mission. That's not what we're advocating here. In fact, that kind of behavior often backfires in the long run. True strategic thinking, when it comes to politics, is about aligning interests and finding win-win solutions whenever possible. It's the difference between someone who maneuvers to get ahead personally, leaving a trail of resentment, and someone who navigates the political landscape to get good things done, earning respect and goodwill. One litmus test I use is to ask myself, am I trying to create an outcome that, even if it benefits me, also genuinely benefits the team or organization? Am I treating people with respect in the process? If the answers are yes, then I feel confident that my use of influence is above board. Let's consider a tangible example of political savvy leading to a great outcome. A colleague of mine, let's call her Maria, was tasked with leading a major change in her organization's operations. She had a vision for how to modernize their processes with new technology. Technically, she had the authority, senior management's backing, to just roll out the changes. But she knew that if the rank-and-file staff weren't on board, the implementation would likely fail or at least face big hurdles. So she took a politically savvy route. She identified a few respected employees on the front lines whom others looked up to, informal leaders in different departments. She brought them into an advisory group early on, asking for their opinions on the changes and genuinely listening to their concerns. Some were skeptical at first, but as Maria incorporated their feedback, they began to feel invested in the outcome. When the time came to implement the change, these informal leaders acted as ambassadors, reassuring their peers, helping with training, and squashing rumors. The transition went far more smoothly than similar changes I've seen elsewhere. Maria's strategy was essentially political savvy in action. Rather than issuing top-down directives, she built a coalition and leveraged the informal networks in a positive way. She didn't manipulate anyone, she engaged them, and by doing so, she turned potential resistors into allies. In personal contexts, political savvy might simply mean understanding and navigating social dynamics. Think of a community project, like trying to establish a new park in your neighborhood. You'd need to deal with local government, neighbors who have differing opinions, maybe fundraising groups. It pays to know which community members are enthusiastic supporters who can influence others, and which are concerned or opposed. Maybe someone worries a park will bring noise or traffic. Engaging with each group thoughtfully, hearing out the concerns, highlighting the benefits. Perhaps the park will increase property values and give families a safe place to play, and maybe adjusting plans to accommodate some reasonable concerns, like setting certain hours to limit noise, is all part of being savvy. The result is that you could turn what might be a contentious process into a collaborative one where most people feel heard and satisfied. The park gets built because someone took the time to navigate the human side of the project, not just the technical and logistical aspects. Developing political savvy is an ongoing learning process. It often comes from a mix of observing others, noticing who gets things done and how they treat people, getting feedback. Sometimes you need a trusted colleague or friend to point out if you're stepping on toes unwittingly, and frankly, making a few mistakes as I did, and learning from them. It requires emotional intelligence, being able to read the room, empathize with others' points of view, and handle disagreements tactfully. It also requires patience, Building trust and alliances doesn't happen overnight, but it's a skill set that pays enormous dividends. When you are good at navigating organizational dynamics, you become the person who can actually implement the great ideas that others might only talk about. You become someone who not only envisions and plans, but also rallies the necessary support to make those visions a reality. Now we've journeyed through the 6 disciplines of strategic thinking, from recognizing patterns and analyzing systems, to staying agile mentally, solving problems systematically, envisioning the future, and finally, navigating the human landscape with political savvy. It's a lot to take in, but the beauty is that these skills complement each other. Together, they form a toolkit for approaching almost any situation life throws at you, with a blend of insight, creativity, practicality, and people smarts. In a world that often feels volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, having this toolkit is especially important. It helps you cut through uncertainty and stay oriented when things are shifting around you. One thing to notice is how the early disciplines set you up to identify and clarify what needs to be done, while the later ones help you actually drive change. Pattern recognition, systems analysis, and mental agility are largely about seeing and understanding. They help you recognize the true challenges and opportunities and decide where to focus. Structured problem solving, visioning, and political savvy are more about doing and influencing. They help you develop solutions, chart a direction, and rally the support needed to turn plans into reality. In practice, of course, you might move back and forth between these modes. Strategic thinking isn't a strict linear sequence. It's a dynamic, iterative process. You might spot a pattern and then jump ahead to start solving a problem, only to realize you need to step back and analyze the system further, and so on. Still, it's useful to sense the rhythm. First, make sure you're working on the right thing, recognize and prioritize, then carry it through, mobilize and execute with effective action. Reflecting on everything we've covered, it's clear that strategic thinking isn't a one-time effort, but a way of life. It's a habit of mind and a set of practices that you grow into. And like any set of skills, you don't master all of them overnight. Each of us might find some of these disciplines come more naturally than others. You might already be great at solving problems logically, but realize you need to work on your long-term vision. Or maybe you're a visionary thinker, but you want to improve on the follow-through and the political navigation to bring those visions to fruition. That's normal. The key is to be aware of these dimensions and continually practice them. In wrapping up this exploration, it's worth noting that strategic thinking is as much about mindset as it is about technique. It's about adopting a proactive, intentional stance toward your life and your challenges. Instead of feeling like a victim of circumstance or a tiny boat tossed in a storm, you start to feel more like the captain of your ship. You can't control the weather, but you can adjust your sails. The 6 disciplines we discussed are like the navigation skills, the sails, the compass that help you do that. It reminds me of an analogy I once heard. Developing these strategic thinking skills is akin to training for a marathon. Some people might be born with a bit more natural talent in one area or another, just like some have a natural runner's build. But everyone can improve with training. The pattern recognizer can get even sharper by learning from more experiences. The systems thinker can deepen their understanding through practice and maybe simulation games or exercises. The mentally agile person can keep their mind limber through new challenges and openness to change. The problem solver can refine their methods with each new complex issue they tackle. The visionary can get clearer and bolder with each goal they set and pursue. And the politically savvy can become more adept at reading and influencing the room with each project and relationship they nurture. Just as a marathon runner logs miles and builds endurance over time, we build these strategic muscles through continuous use. And sometimes, those who have to work harder for it, who maybe weren't born sprinters, appreciate the journey even more and end up accomplishing amazing things through sheer dedication. As you think about applying these ideas in your own life, start small and be patient with yourself. Maybe begin by noticing patterns this week, in your work, in your habits, in the conversations you have. Or take a current challenge and map out the system around it to see connections you hadn't noticed. Try toggling your perspective from big picture to detail on a problem you care about. When a problem arises, resist the urge to jump straight to a quick fix. Instead, take a moment to define what's really going on and outline a path to solve it. Dream a little, articulate a vision for something you deeply care about, and share it with someone, or write it down. And in your next collaborative effort, pay attention to the human dynamics. Who could you partner with? Who needs to be convinced? And how might you approach them? Each time you practice one of these disciplines, you get a bit stronger. Life will continue to be full of surprises, both good and bad. Strategic thinking doesn't mean you'll predict everything or always make the perfect decision, far from it. But it does mean that you'll have a greater sense of control and clarity. You'll approach situations with a toolkit and a mindset that can turn ambiguity into opportunity and adversity into insight. Perhaps most importantly, thinking strategically can transform how you view yourself. You start seeing yourself as an active agent in your life's story, someone who can shape their path rather than just react to events. That shift is powerful. It builds confidence and resilience. In the end, the 6 disciplines of strategic thinking offer more than just a way to be effective at work or achieve personal goals, though they certainly do that. They offer a path to being more intentional and thoughtful in everything you do. They encourage you to learn continuously, to stay curious about how things work, and to connect with others in meaningful ways to make things happen. It's a journey of continuous improvement and growth. As you carry these ideas forward, remember that every expert strategist started somewhere, usually with a lot of questions and uncertainties. It's the persistence in practicing these disciplines that sets them apart. So here's to your personal journey in strategic thinking. May you find patterns where others see randomness, clarity amidst complexity, flexibility in the face of change, solutions to the tough problems, visions that inspire you, and the camaraderie and support of others as you turn those visions into reality. With these disciplines in hand, you might be surprised at just how much you can shape your future and perhaps even influence the world around you. After all, big things often have small beginnings, a single thought, a single step. Perhaps reading this essay is one such step for you, and many more will follow. Happy strategizing and best of luck on the road ahead.